Okay, last week we left off with comparing Solomon and Adam and Eve. So Solomon in 1 Kings 3, God comes to him in a dream and says, "Hey, ask whatever you want and I'll give it to you." And Solomon asks for wisdom. God says, "All the things that you could have asked for and you didn't, I'll give you those too because you asked for wisdom." And it was wisdom. Remember, wisdom means practical skill or skillful moral living. Sometimes the word is used in reference to someone who's skilled with their hands. So the people that built the tabernacle, that fashioned all of the things, they are said to have a spirit of wisdom in that they can take these raw materials, work them, change them, order them in such a way that something beautiful and good comes out on the other side. And they're said to have wisdom with whatever that is. So there might be some in the congregation that have wisdom or that have chokhmah. You gotta kind of clear your throat with the h, but so it's like choch, like that, chokhmah, yeah, like that. But if you have chokhmah with wood, like maybe there's some woodworkers, right? And they can take the raw material, change it, fashion it, and make it beautiful, make it right, make it good. Um, but you can have that with living, with moral living, with righteousness. And that's what Proverbs is talking about most of the time. That's what Solomon asked for. He asked for wisdom concerning leadership. He doesn't know how to go out and come in before this great people, Israel. And he needs to know how to lead them in the right way and how to discern good from evil. That brought us back to Genesis, where Adam and Eve are tempted to eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Link that with wisdom, and the difference between them is that Solomon asked for it, and Adam and Eve took it for themselves. And there's a difference in between the taking and the receiving, right? Receiving, you have to humble yourself and receive from someone else outside of yourself, right? It has a different posture. So I raised this question last time. Is the knowledge of good and evil something God doesn't want us to have? I mean, if you're just reading the Genesis narrative, it would seem like no, because that's the only tree you're not allowed to eat from. But then you get Solomon, and he's praised. How is it different? Ah, okay. So now we need knowledge or we need wisdom because we have sin in the world. Okay. Yeah, it's a different situation now. Now we need that. Okay. Things are different now. It is different now. We can eat bacon. That's right. The whole new world. Yeah. Yeah, there it is. Tammy's shaking her head. That's okay. um, you could. I mean, you're my Jasmine. You're Aladdin. Okay. Um, getting back to taking and receiving. That's that's. I think that's also a major difference. Is that was like the one thing that I think God wants to give us wisdom, but like the knowledge of good and evil, the discernment between good and evil. But it wasn't. But it's in His time and what He when He wants to give it to us. And the fact that Adam and Eve took it for themselves, they desired to be on the same place as God, right? You shall be as gods, knowing good and evil. That belongs in the divine realm. And God, I think God wants us to have that, but He wants us to receive it from Him, not take it for ourselves. But now that we have taken it for ourselves, it's more imperative that we receive it from God. And yes, I mean, it takes a lot of, yeah. You gotta know a lot of things if you're gonna name all the animals. Mm. Yeah, he's like, oh, none of these animals are like me, right? And then he has someone to live life with. Starts the first family, first community. Um, but notice it also flips the idea of, this is kind of review from last week, flips the idea of the fear of the Lord. So in Proverbs, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. You have to humble yourself before the Lord before you can receive wisdom, knowledge of good and evil, and the discernment between the two. Whereas Adam and Eve, they took it for themselves, and then they were afraid of God. They ran and hid themselves, and they made clothes for themselves. And so there's this like reversal here, which I think is really interesting. Um, but for us, what we should do is we should be like Solomon and ask for wisdom. And I didn't have the James quote in my notes, but I put it in there now. But James 2 through 7 reads like this: My brethren, count it all joy when you fall into diverse temptations, testings, knowing this, that the trying of your faith worketh patience. But let patience have her perfect work, that you may be perfect and entire, wanting nothing. If any of you, so notice, first, there's testing and trials or temptations. That's assumed. When you live in this world, that's what you're going to encounter. And what James is saying is, hey, count it all joy when you encounter those things, because that's how you learn patience. When you have to tell your children the same thing again and again and again, how else do you learn patience? Like, the only way to get patience is to go through more trials. It's the only way. It's the only way to learn how to endure is to go through more. Like, how do you know you can endure? Well, because I did. Like, it's the only way. He's like, that's a good thing. It's hard, but it's a good thing. It produces something that's good. If any of you lack wisdom, again, usually temptations involve some kind of choice. You have to discern good from evil. You have to make a choice. Which one are you going to choose? Well, you need wisdom for that. You need wisdom from that. So, again, having patience do her perfect work. If any of you lack wisdom, let him ask of God, that giveth to all men liberally, and upbraideth not, and it shall be given him. But let him ask in faith, nothing wavering. For he that wavereth is like a wave of the sea driven with the wind and tossed. For let not that man think that he shall receive anything of the Lord. You will not receive wisdom if you're wavering in asking. Like, does God have wisdom or doesn't he? If he does, ask for it and trust that he will give it to you when you need it, especially in the moments of trials and temptations when you need it the most. You can trust the Lord that he will give it to you. This is teaching. You're going to have to go through those. You're going to have to endure through those and learn patience. But the Lord is with you and he'll provide wisdom. He'll help you make wise decisions in those trying times. The context. And that is a joyful thing. I think that's why he's like, count it all joy. Like, how do I count trials and tribulations and testings joy? Because you know the Lord's with you. You have to believe that. That can be hard in the middle of it, but that's where it's at. And if you waver in that, don't think you'll receive anything from the Lord. Kind of tough. The Proverbs 1:7, fear the Lord. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, right? Adam and Eve feared the Lord after they coveted something the Lord did not want them to have yet. After they took the fruit, after they were ashamed of what they did, then they were afraid and they hid themselves and they got it backwards. So if you begin with the fear of the Lord, then you'll receive wisdom from the Lord and have a flourishing life. You can't rely on your own instincts. Can't rely on your own instincts. When you do that, you will invariably make foolish choices that you think are wise. That's the trick. You don't know that it's not wise. Like, the fool thinks everything they do is really smart. Part of what makes them a fool is they don't realize that it's really dumb. They can't see it. They're a fool. A fool despises wisdom and instruction. That means to take something that is of value and to treat it as if it's worthless. Despise. Like, oh, I'm disgusted with that. Or with you, or with that, whatever you're despising, whatever it is. So that was verse 1. All right, verse 2, Proverbs chapter 1. We're going to see that there are different audiences. It gives us a list of purposes for the book. So it's like an introduction to the whole book, and it's like, hey, here's the purpose of this book. You should read this, and the purpose, there are different categories for each purpose, or different audiences. First, the purpose of the book for the reader. This is the broadest audience. Verse 2, to know wisdom and instruction, to perceive the words of understanding. So for the reader, that's what this is for you. But what do these words mean? All right, so to know, to gain knowledge of wisdom. Kind of touched on this already, but wisdom refers to skill in living, making wise choices. One lives life with moral skill so that something of lasting value is produced from your life. Moral skill. There is a moral dynamic to wisdom in Proverbs. This instruction is in different contexts can be translated as discipline or chastisement. Like when you're instructing someone, you're correcting them, right? You're disciplining them to go into a certain path, right? So this instruction consists of wisdom acquired by observing the consequences of foolish actions in others, and then developing the ability to exercise self-control over your natural inclinations to folly. So you learn from other people's bad examples. That's instruction. You're disciplining yourself. Self-discipline, right? Because your natural inclination is going to be towards folly, right? You're bent towards sin. You need to discipline yourself to go against that grain. So you need instruction. That's what instruction is implying. Proverbs 14:12 is, there's a way that seemeth right unto a man, but the end thereof are the ways of death, right? So our natural instincts, our natural inclinations, we need some kind of objective outside wisdom to help us make those decisions. Because what seems right in our own eyes, it seems good. But a lot of times, not every time, but a lot of times, those things are not the wise thing or not the good thing to do. The way that seems right to a man, but the end thereof are the ways of death. Is the action that I'm about to take going to lead me towards life or towards death? I need wisdom to know. And instruction. Instruction would be like, when I saw this other person do this action, it led to a lot of trouble for them. I think I'm going to avoid that. Like, if you have siblings, right? It's like your brother or sister starts like really arguing with your parents and yelling at them, and then the hammer drops, and you're like, I'm not going to do that. That didn't end so well for my brother or my sister, right? That was not good. Not good. Or the example I usually give to my employees is when I failed miserably as an employee. There was this time where I was working at the Little Rock Climbing Center, and me and Tammy were in this parenting class, and we won tickets to a marriage conference, Little Rock, Arkansas. And I didn't put a time off request before the schedule was published. So my boss published the schedule, and I sent a text like, I can't work that day. Don't ever send a text. That's really stupid. I now know this. I didn't know that then. So that was like my direct supervisor. The big boss calls me. He's like, so this is how it's going to end? Like, what? Like, yeah, you can't work. You're fired. I was like, that's not, I'm sorry. I didn't, He's like, figure it out. Yeah. I ended up paying a guy $200 to take my shift. I figured it out. Because in my mind I was like, well, if it comes down to working at the climbing center and going to this marriage conference with my wife, which our marriage was not in a good place at that time, I'm going to choose my wife. But I don't want to break this I've been working here for 4 years. Been really faithful. Like, don't do it over text. That was so stupid. So stupid. I tell that to employees now. Like, look, I've been naive and dumb. I've made mistakes too. Learn from my mistakes. That's instruction. That's instruction. Learning from, and then exercising self-control. Like, I don't have to go down that path and experience it to learn from it. Right? Pastor usually says, like, there are some people that are saved out of sin, and then there are some people that are saved from sin by the examples of others. Praise the Lord. You don't have to suffer the consequences of going through that muck of sin. So, in verse 2, lastly, to perceive the words of understanding. Perceive and understand, those two words there are like the same word for discernment. And you could translate it to discern the words of discernment. Like, kind of weird when you put it that way. But it's the ability to make distinctions between moral options. You can make a distinction between what's right and what's wrong. Proverbs 26, 4 and 5. This is a good example. Like, you have to make a distinction. One of my favorite examples of the book of Proverbs, because in the first verse, it tells you what to do, tells you to do one thing, and then in the next verse, it tells you to do the exact opposite thing. They're right next to each other. So what do you do? Proverbs 26, 4 and 5. Answer not a fool according to his folly, lest thou also be like unto him. So, if you get into, like, this takes place in comment sections all the time, right? There's some troll in the comment sections, and they're just talking nonsense. And then you start to, like, oh, no, what about this? And you just start, throwing out counterexamples and blah, blah, blah. And then you get into this long string, like, don't answer a fool like that. They're not actually wanting to learn anything. They're just wanting to cause trouble in the comment section. And if you've been at the fair booth, every once in a while, someone like this will come. And they'll ask you they'll just pepper you with questions, and you can give them an answer, and it doesn't matter. Because then it's, well, what about this? Well, what about this? Well, what about this? They're not actually seeking any kind of truth or answers or anything. They're hoping to make you look like a fool. In the process, making themselves look like a fool. They don't see that, though, because they're a fool. Hard to see that you're a fool when you're a fool. The very next verse. Answer a fool according to his folly, lest he be wise in his own conceit. So, yeah, there are some things that when the fool is being a fool, you need to correct them. Otherwise, they'll think that they're smart, and they'll continue down that path. So which do you do? It depends on the situation. It depends on the circumstances, right? I would say most of the social media comment section stuff falls into that first verse. It's not important. You're probably not going to change somebody's mind. Probably. It's billions of strangers. You don't have a personal relationship with them. You're probably not going to change their mind. Probably. You might, but probably not. But someone you have a personal relationship with, they know that you love them and that you want what's best for them, and you correct them because they're going down a foolish path, that'll land, hopefully, sometimes. But probably more often than the other way around, right? This is a good way to think about this is, what hill are you willing to die on? Because if you answer, right, if you decide not to answer a fool according to his folly, you're like, oh, well, I don't want to be like the fool. Like, there are some things that are true and that you should take a stand for. This is a hill I'm willing to die on. Jesus Christ is the resurrected Lord. Like, I'm gonna correct you on that. The fool's gonna be like, well, God, there's no. It's like, no, that's something like just choose the hills you're willing to die on. It doesn't have to be specifically about scripture or any scriptural truth. There are certain things that you should be willing, like saying that there are absolutely no differences between men and women is ridiculous. Like that should be a hill that we're willing to die on. That it's just ridiculous. A man cannot be a woman cannot be a man. Like this is really simple. That's it is that simple. But it's really confusing in our culture right now. It shouldn't be, but it is. How do you say that without just being without being mean or scoffing at the person? Like the fool, right, despises they're going to despise scriptural truth. They're going to think it's of no value, worthless. And part of the reason that they're wrong and what they're doing is evil is because they're scoffing. So if we scoff right back at them, that's okay because we're standing on truth. No, they can stand for the truth, but don't do it in such a way that makes that dehumanizes them and makes them feel like they're worthless. You can do that. That's the whole truth and love thing. So the purpose for verse 2, the purpose of the book of Proverbs is for the reader to gain knowledge about the skills required for a moral life, self-control from the negative examples of others, and to make moral distinctions. That's the purpose for the reader. That's what you're going to gain if you read the book of Proverbs. Again, skills required for a moral life, self-control by the negative examples of others, and making moral distinctions. All right, second purpose. This is from the student's perspective. What's the purpose for the student? Verse 3, to receive the instruction of wisdom, justice, and judgment, and equity. Equity. That's a hot word. Doesn't mean the same thing the way that people use it today. But to receive, again, this is to acquire something worth having, and it doesn't come from yourself. This is the purpose for the student. You need to open yourself up to the wisdom, right? You need to humble yourself and say, I don't know what I don't know. I need someone to teach me. Fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. It doesn't come from yourself. You are not born with wisdom. You have to acquire it. You have to receive it. And from the student's perspective, it has to be received, right? The instruction of wisdom, what's that? This is the discipline of prudence. The discipline of prudence. This is a shrewdness and a good kind of cunning. I mean, kind of has the same flavor of like to ponder things. Focuses on acting prudently. The word can also focus on the results of acting prudently to have success, describing the result of a self-disciplined life. So it's like the student needs to learn how to plan their life. Really simple examples. You should brush your teeth. That's a prudent thing to do, unless you want your teeth to fall out of your head. It's not the funnest thing. It's not like glamorous but it's just something you need to do every single day. Probably after every meal or twice a day, or I don't do it twice. But you should, right? You should brush your teeth. You should change the oil in your car when it's appropriate. If you don't plan that out, you're going to destroy your car. I had a friend in high school. His entire motor seized up because he didn't have any oil in it. In the middle of winter, his car just died, and he goes, I don't know what happened. And my brother goes over, he checks the dipstick, and it's bone dry. He goes, do you have any oil in your engine? He goes, oh. Yeah, that was a foolish thing to do. It's really dumb, right? Don't walk into intersections looking at your cell phone. That's a prudent thing to do, right? Have a plan. You should have life insurance if you're responsible for people. That's prudent. You know you're not promised tomorrow. You know that. So take account for that. Like if you have a wife and some kids, get some life insurance. If you're young, it won't cost that much per month. It's a prudent thing to do. Do you have to do it? Is it morally wrong if you don't do it? No. But it's a prudent thing to do. Right? Have a plan. So what are the results? What are the fruits of this instruction of wisdom? Right? To receive the instruction of wisdom. What is that? Well, it's justice. Justice has this idea of action. It's righteousness, doing what is right according to God's law. That's justice. So we have action. Then you have judgment. These are your thoughts. You're making decisions that are just. You're making judgments on things. Don't judge me. Okay, we won't touch that. But that has the idea of your thoughts. So you have actions, thoughts, and then equity is a way of life. This has the idea of an activity that is morally upright, metaphorically keeping on a straight path and not turning to the left or right. So the purpose of the book of Proverbs for the disciple or the inexperienced in life is to learn self-discipline in your thoughts, your actions, and your way of life. That's what you're going to get when you read the book of Proverbs and you apply it to your life. Self-discipline in your thoughts, your actions, and your way of life. Verse 4. To give subtlety to the simple, to the young man, knowledge and discretion. So this is the purpose of from the teacher's perspective, right? To give, right? To give, or another way to put that, to impart something to a naive youth. Parents, this is you. You have children, they are naive. They don't know how to behave in the world. You have to instruct them. You have to teach them. You have to give them wisdom. This is where it comes in, to impart something to naive youth. Subtlety to the simple. Again, this is prudence, shrewdness, craftiness, or cleverness. It refers to a shrewd plan of action for life. Right? And that's like, just like what I just said. Annual checkup at the doctor, buying life insurance. Give yourself more space to brake when on icy roads. That's prudent. Slow down. Slow down. Right? Or a good example is an athlete who trains to reach a goal. They have to sacrifice certain things in order to reach the goal. So, subtlety to who? To the simple. This is the naive, the simpleton, the open-minded person who is highly influenceable. I don't know if that's a word, but they are easily influenced either towards that which is good or to that which is bad. They don't have life experience to know they're being fooled by some charlatan. They're naive. They're simple, right? This term describes one easily persuaded and gullible, open to any influence, good or bad, the simple-minded. This is the wide-eyed youth who is headed for trouble unless he listens to the counsel of wisdom. The simple. Yeah, they're easily influenced either by wisdom or by folly. This is in the last part of the verse, to the young man, knowledge and discretion. This is knowledge of how to form and carry out a morally wise plan for life. It describes the ability to make plans or formulate the best course of action for attaining a goal. So again, planning. Someone who just flies by the seat of their pants, they'll get it right sometimes. And then when they get it wrong, it's going to hurt really bad. It's better to have a plan, to be wise. So the purpose for the teacher, right, is to impart a plan to carry out a moral way of life for the simple-minded young person. That's what Proverbs will do for the teacher. Also, just because we're talking about simple minded and naive youth doesn't mean that someone who already has a lot of life experience can't learn anything from the book of Proverbs. The next one, verse 5, a wise man will hear and will increase in learning, and a man of understanding shall attain unto wise counsels. Right? So the wise person can become even more wise. The book is not just for newcomers. It's for all who want to grow in wisdom. If you want to ask the Lord for wisdom, a good way to receive it is to read the book of Proverbs. Was it? I think it was Billy Graham used to say that he would read a chapter a day to keep the devil away. Right? Because there's 31 chapters every month, not February, but every month has 30 or 31 chapters, or 30 or 31 days, and you can just read a chapter a day. And when you get into the later chapters, so anywhere after the chapter 10, it's just all of these little pithy statements, and it just seems completely random. Like, what's going on here? Like, yeah, that's a lot like life. Your life, things that happen in your life just happen, right? And it's like, oh, now I have to decide about this. Oh, I have to decide about that. And it's a lot like just these random things happening. Chapter a day. That's what, Billy Graham would advise. Not a bad idea. A wise man will hear and will increase. In the Hebrew, it could have the force of let him hear, let him increase in knowledge. That was a lot. Learning. That word means practical application of the information of life. Practical application. Remember, you can gather all the information you want, but how you apply it and execute it, that's where the wisdom comes in. Right? Just having all the information, having access to all the information on the internet. Well, we have more access to all the information ever. Like, great. That still doesn't help you make really wise choices. It doesn't. A man of understanding. Who is that? And a man of understanding shall attain unto wise counsels. A man of understanding, this is the person who has made discernment a habit. It's the opposite of the naive, simple-minded youth. So in these two verses, the one before it was talking about the simple-minded, naive youth, and this is a man of understanding. They've had life experience. They know, they understand how life kind of turns out, depending on the actions that you commit to. That person can attain to wise counsels, the ability to steer a right course through life. And that, metaphorically, it's like steering a ship through rough seas. Someone who can do that is wise. They have practical skill to not sink the ship. Like, that's kind of what it means. So you can steer a right course. It's like, whoa, some big swell's coming. I'm gonna go this way, or we're gonna have to deal with this, so we have to go this, or like, knowing what to do though. All right, so the purpose of the book of Proverbs for the wise person is to never stop learning, discerning, and steering a right course for life. The purpose of the book for the reader, again, it's like kind of sandwiched. You got the purpose of the reader at the beginning, the purpose of the reader at the end. This is the last one, verse 6. To understand a proverb and the interpretation, the words of the wise and their dark sayings. Dark. All right, so to understand a proverb and the interpretation. This is the last purpose. By studying Proverbs, the reader will discern the hermeneutical or the interpretive key to understanding more and more Proverbs. So it's kind of like Jesus and his parables. You remember, the first parable he teaches is the parable of the sower. Right? Sower went out to sow, just throwing seed. And some of the seed lands on the road, some of it lands on rocky soil, some of it among thorns and thistles, some of it on good soil. And there's a different produce based on where it lands. That's all he says, the crowd. And then the disciples come up and go, what does that mean? They don't understand it yet. He explains what it means. And he goes, if you don't understand this parable, how will you understand any parable? Jesus is this wisdom teacher. How he teaches, he gives these little parables and makes you think about it, right? My favorite is the parable of lost things in Luke 15. We have the lost sheep, and then the lost coin, and then the lost sons. And when the prodigal son comes back, and there's music and dancing, there's a celebration. They kill the fatted calf. It's awesome. And the older son hears the music and he hears the dancing. I love that. Like, that's one of my most favorite moments in all the Bible. He heard the dancing. That was a shindig. Man. Just like, yes! He heard the dancing on a dirt floor. Whoa. That was a party. It was a huge part. It was a rager. Like, it was a party. And then he gets mad. Like, the reversal there, it's like, there's so much joy. There's so much joy. There's so much joy. I am so angry there's so much joy. How dare there be joy? And he just launches into his father. Oh, man, it makes you think about the hearts of the Pharisees and the scribes. And then also the hearts of prostitutes, the tax collectors, all the people that were gathering around Jesus. Hear his message of hope for sinners. All right. But the words of the wise and their dark sayings whose meaning is obscure or hidden, such as a riddle, an allegory, or a perplexing moral problem. Perplexing questions or ambiguous sayings. The sayings of the wise often take the forms of riddles that must be discerned. And you get that at the end of the book of Proverbs. Oh man, there's 4 things I don't understand. Oh man, or there's 3 things I don't understand. Yay, 4 that are kind of interesting. The way of a bird in the air, the way of a snake on a rock, the way of a ship on the sea, and the way of a man with a young maid. Way, there's movement. Why are these moving? And you just think about it. Think about it. It's interesting. So the purpose of the book for the reader is to learn how to interpret Proverbs and other wise words. That's what we get. The first step is verse 7. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and instruction. And to despise wisdom, to despise means to take something of value and think that it's worthless. That's what a fool does with wisdom and instruction. This is the first step towards living a morally skillful life. It's humility. It's understanding that you don't know what you don't know. Don't boast of yourself to be like, yeah, I'm so smart. I can just figure this out. Yeah. I'm just going to hustle. Yeah. You have to know that you don't know that much. You need teaching, you need instruction, you need help. I'm going to quote Ortland from a couple of places in his commentary. Quote, until we come alive to God, it seems cool to stand aloof and laugh at everything. It feels superior, but it is foolish because we are not neutral. We do not have our little devilish nature sitting on one shoulder and tempting us, and our little angelic nature sitting on the other shoulder restraining us. We have no angel. We have only a devil of a heart telling us we are angels, and we believe it. That guilty naivete about ourselves is how we are born. It's why we hate correction. Theologians call it original sin, and it is very real. We need Jesus to save us, first and foremost, from not needing to be saved. That's what we need, the fear of the Lord. I'll repeat that. It's such a good reversal. We need Jesus to save us first and foremost from not needing to be saved. That's what we need. That's the first step. He also quotes from C.S. Lewis, Ortland does. This is the wisdom of the cross. That wisdom frees us from the distortions of our pride and opens the way to resurrection and new life. In the Pilgrim's Regress, that's the Pilgrim's Regress, not the Pilgrim's Progress. C.S. Lewis wrote it. It's written in a similar way as the Pilgrim's Progress. It's an allegory of someone traveling through a land that has different philosophies that he visits. It's a little bit harder to read than the Pilgrim's Progress, kind of dense, but it's really interesting too. Back to the quote. In The Pilgrim's Regress, C.S. Lewis says that the path of wisdom leads through a valley. Now he's quoting Pilgrim's Regress. And what is this valley called? We call it now simply Wisdom's Valley, but the oldest maps mark it as the Valley of Humiliation. You have to humble yourself. Fear of the Lord is expressed in reverential submission to his will, characteristic of true worship. Fear of the Lord is the foundation for wisdom. That's in Proverbs 9:10, and I'll read these references in just a second. Fear of the Lord is the foundation for wisdom, Proverbs 9:10, and the discipline leading to wisdom, chapter 15, verse 33. It is expressed in the hatred of evil, chapter 8:13, and avoidance of sin, chapter 16:6, and so results in a prolonged life, chapter 10:27, 19:23. This is where we'll end, but I'll just read these verses real quick. Proverbs 9:10. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and knowledge of the holy is understanding. Proverbs 15:33. The fear of the Lord is the instruction of wisdom, and before honor is humility. If you don't, as you're reading through the book of Proverbs, like that little principle right there, how many times did Jesus say, don't place yourself up at the high seat at the dinner? Humble yourself, place yourself at a lower seat, and then be raised up by somebody else. Before honor is humility. Jesus lived his whole life that way. Proverbs 8:13. The fear of the Lord is to hate evil, pride and arrogancy, and the evil way, and the froward mouth do I hate. Proverbs 16:6. By mercy and truth, iniquity is purged, and by the fear of the Lord, men depart from evil. Proverbs 10:27. The fear of the Lord prolongeth days, but the years of the wicked shall be shortened. You want a short life? Be a fool. That's what the book of Proverbs will teach you over and over and over and over again. It'll repeat it in a myriad of different ways. Well, let's pray. Our Father in heaven, thank you so much for your wisdom. Thank you for this book. I pray it will be an encouragement to us. Lord, help us to take these truths and just by way of introduction, just think about how we live our moral lives. Lord, how we discern what's good and bad, how we make decisions, how we teach our children, whether we should continue to just learn and learn and learn and learn, like the wise do. Lord, help us to see these purposes in this book, and help us to be wise about applying them to our lives. Thank you so much for giving us your wisdom. I pray, Lord, that we would worship you now and sing praises to your name for being so good to us, for providing everything we need and more. Lord, help us to understand your word as it's preached. Lord, may we leave here changed people, more like you in your own image. In Jesus' name.